Hello, and today you find me on Eastbourne Station. I'm just going over to Brighton to see the hidden project which my friend Fabulous Robbie is involved with. Now this is an art therapy group. I'm involved with Art in Mind, which is an art therapy group at the Towner here in Eastbourne. And art therapy is a big interest of mine. It's a big thing at the moment. I've found it useful. It's not a magic cure, but it can alleviate things a bit. And there is almost a kind of art therapy community now along the coast. So I'm not quite sure what the hidden project does in relation to what we do at Art in Mind. Robbie says it's quite difficult to describe. You have to experience it. So I'm going over to Brighton now to see him. And you're joining me outside Cafe Frappe in the North Lanes, having had one of the crappiest short train journeys that I've ever actually had. Unbelievably awful, considering it was only all the way from Eastbourne to Brighton. And Lilan, funnily enough, was talking about the North Lanes last night, and she said something not at all complimentary about them. She said that they're like a kind of museum dedicated to themselves. They're kind of obsessed with the notion of being the North Lanes rather than actually being the North Lanes, and that it's all really kind of living off what it was in the 70s and 80s, and I think there's some truth in that. I mean, I'm old enough to remember them during the late 1970s in their glory days, although I was very young. I was late childhood, early teens, and they had a real buzz and a real atmosphere then. And you had shops like Nasty just around the corner from here, but today they are a little bit too self-conscious of what they actually are. Ooh, we're North Lanes. And she actually says she finds Hastings more interesting these days. More of an authentic buzz, but still it's very nice. The iced coffee is absolutely bloody gorgeous. So we are going to go onto the Dome and see Fabulous Robbie's art, although he's kind of vague about what it is, whether it's an artwork, an installation or a happening, or maybe a bit of all three, but we will hopefully find out when we get there. Outside Figaro's, just outside St James's Street, just round the corner from it. And this is an amazingly reasonable place. You can get a cup of tea, a mug of tea, and a slice of cake for £2 as a deal. And I thought, well, I shouldn't really be eating cake, but with a deal like that I will. Now, I do have some rather disappointing news for you all, which is that we're not going to be able to see the Fabulous Robbie's artwork today. The reason being that it is in fact a month early. I went along to the venue and found out it's this day next month. So I shouldn't really broadcast this, and people will say, oh, Julia, you're making yourself look stupid and all this, but there's no need to share it with the world. But this is the kind of thing that happens with conditions like mine. This is not the first time I've turned up for something a month early or a month late. This tends to happen a lot. And I'm a little peed off because I've wasted money I didn't really have on coming over here. But on the other hand, it's the first day I've had in Brighton this summer. I went over a couple of times in the winter, and Brighton in the winter is grim. Any coastal town in the winter it's not very nice, but now it's summer, it's lovely. I must say though, St James's Street, it's better than I've remembered it being. I used to absolutely love St James's Street from the sort of mid-80s until early 2000s, and I watched it get better and better in that era. And then in the last sort of 10 years or so, it's gone downhill again. But it's not that bad today. You know, it's not the St James's Street of the late 90s, but it's better than I expected to find it. But perhaps the sunshine helps. Another interesting fact about this little side street off St James's Street is that many years ago, when I was involved with the old SM scene, there used to be a dungeon for hire right underneath here. I can't remember exactly where the shop was, but they used to have a basement. And at one end they had the workshop where they made the leather equipment and leather clothing, and the other half was barred off, like the bars of a cell, and they turned it into a dungeon. There had once been a fireplace, and they put bars in front of the fireplace and converted it into a kind of small holding cell where people could be kind of confined. There was a large wooden pillar up the middle which looked as if it might have actually been structural, and that had restraint points on it. It was quite an impressive setup, and it was a dungeon for hire. If you wanted to go down there and do a scene with someone, you could hire it. I never used it, but it was an interesting little facility. And I remember going in there once to the shop part and down, have a look around the work area with a female friend, and they asked us straight out, because it was during the Labour Party conference in Brighton, "Ah, are you both with the Labour Party conference?" Which of course we weren't, but interesting that we were assumed to be in politics, being interested in things like hiring a dungeon. But no, it all went on underneath the tarmac there, out under the blacktop. A foot or two underneath there was a dungeon, and while cars were going up and down, people were doing all kinds of stuff under there in the 1990s, which I think is quite interesting. That was a waste of a day and a waste of resources, simply because I got the date of Robbie's art show wrong. So I'm quite upset with myself at the moment, but these things do happen. Now, on the plus side, I've seen a bit of Brighton for the first time in ages, and I need to explain here that when I talk about the coast, Brighton is not really the coast. Everyone will say, "Oh, Brighton, it's on the south coast." It's on the south coast, but it's not of the south coast. Brighton is only on the south coast and only part of Sussex in a strictly geographical sense. Socially and culturally, it isn't. And in fact, the nickname for Brighton down here, what we locals call it, is South London on Sea. And I think you can probably trace that back to the days of the Prince Regent, Brinny, later George IV, when he first went down there and built the pavilion. It made it an extension of the court. And certainly today, Brighton is like a bit of London 60 miles to the south. South London on Sea. Not really Sussex, not really the coast, but very interesting and great fun. And interestingly, I find that tea and coffee in Brighton is now more affordable than it is in Eastbourne. Now, 20 odd years ago, we used to get annoyed because it was almost £2 for a coffee in Brighton. Oh my God, what are they on? But today, I can get a mug of tea and a slice of cake for £2 in Brighton, right off St James's Street. Now, another one I went to, Cafe Frappe, couple of quid for a nice chilled coffee. You wouldn't get that in Eastbourne. So Brighton is actually getting cheaper. Perhaps it's the old Thatcherite competition thing, you know. Capitalist competition forcing down prices. And also Brighton's not as grotty as it was a few years ago. I was favourably impressed. It had got very, very run down, especially St James's Street, but it didn't look too bad. I had a better time than I thought I would. However, I'm peed off with myself for wasting resources and wasting a day, going on the right day but on the wrong month. It's the sort of thing I do, I'm afraid. It's very Julia, and that's what you're watching. It's Tea with Julia, and that sometimes means we go to the wrong place on the wrong day, because that's how I am. But who cares? Also, I noticed they don't have as many herring gulls as we do. Brighton, despite all those fast food outlets, has not got the massive number of herring gulls that we do here in Eastbourne.